It happens in seconds. Red and blue lights explode in your rearview mirror. Your heart drops. Your hands tighten on the wheel. And before you can even process what's happening, a uniformed officer is standing beside your window asking one simple question. Where are you coming from? Seems harmless, right? But in many cases, that one question has triggered arrests, searches, and court cases that people never saw coming. And here's the part that almost no one realizes. The way you answer that question can quietly shape everything that happens next. Have you ever been in that situation before? Or imagined what you would say if it happened to you? Tell me in the comments, because what you think the right answer is might actually put you at risk. Because this isn't just small talk. And this is where things take a turn most drivers never expect. When an officer asks, "Where are you coming from?" it feels casual, almost conversational, like they're just trying to make friendly dialogue. But here's what most people don't realize. In many cases, that question is not about conversation at all. It's about observation. It's about establishing a timeline. And sometimes, it's about looking for inconsistencies. Under U.S. law, during a lawful traffic stop, officers are allowed to ask certain questions. Courts have generally held that officers can ask questions related to the stop, and even some unrelated questions, as long as they don't unreasonably extend the duration of the stop. But here's where things get interesting. You are not always legally required to answer those unrelated questions. And that's the part that surprises people. Because the pressure in that moment feels real. You're sitting there, engine running, lights flashing behind you, adrenaline rising, and someone in authority is looking directly at you expecting an answer. And this is where most drivers make a critical mistake. They start talking. They start explaining. They start filling the silence. But here's what happens next that almost no one sees coming. The more you say, the more information you give. And the more information you give, the more opportunities there are for things to go wrong. Not because you did anything illegal, but because human communication is imperfect. People misremember details. People phrase things awkwardly. People contradict themselves without realizing it. And in many cases, those small inconsistencies can raise suspicion. And once suspicion enters the situation, everything changes. What happens next shocks most drivers, because a simple traffic stop can escalate, not because of what you did, but because of what was said. Now here's the key point you need to understand. There's a difference between being polite and volunteering unnecessary information. And this is where most people get confused. Because you absolutely should remain respectful. You should not argue, escalate, or act aggressively. That can make the situation worse very quickly. But being respectful does not mean you have to answer every question in detail. And this is where a simple, legally safe response comes in. Instead of giving a full explanation, many legal professionals recommend a calm, neutral approach. Something like, "I prefer not to answer any questions," or "I'm just traveling." Simple, calm, non-confrontational. And here's why that matters. Because you're not refusing to cooperate with lawful orders. You're not being hostile. You're simply choosing not to provide additional information beyond what is legally required. And under U.S. law, in many situations, you have the right to remain silent. But here's what most people don't realize. How you say it matters just as much as what you say. Tone changes everything. If you say it defensively, it can escalate tension. If you say it calmly, it often keeps the interaction neutral. And this is where things get interesting again, because officers are trained to observe behavior, not just words. Your tone, your body language, your eye contact, all of it contributes to how the situation unfolds. So the goal isn't to win the interaction. The goal is to get through it smoothly, safely, and legally protected. But here's the part that most people overlook. Sometimes, even truthful answers can create complications. Let's say you answer honestly. "I'm coming from a friend's house." Seems harmless. But what if the officer follows up? Which friend? Where do they live? How long were you there? Now you're in a conversation you didn't plan for. And this is where things take another turn, because every additional question increases the chance of misunderstanding. And in many cases, that's where situations start to spiral. Not because someone is guilty, but because the conversation becomes complicated. And here's something else most people never consider. Silence is not an admission of guilt. Courts have generally recognized that individuals have the right to avoid self-incrimination. But, and this is important, that right must be exercised clearly and calmly, not aggressively, not sarcastically, not emotionally. Because again, perception matters. Now imagine this scenario. Two drivers get pulled over. Both are asked the same question. Where are you coming from? The first driver starts explaining everything. Long story, details, extra information. The second driver stays calm. Officer, I'd prefer not to answer questions. Both interactions start the same, but what happens next can be very different. Because the second driver has limited the flow of information. They've reduced the chance of inconsistency. They've kept the interaction focused, and that can make a real difference. But here's what most people still get wrong. This isn't about being difficult. It's about being aware. Because once words are spoken, you can't take them back. And this is where many legal cases begin, not with actions, but with statements. Statements that were unnecessary, statements that were misunderstood, statements that were later used as evidence. And suddenly, a routine stop becomes something much bigger. Now here's the twist most people never expect. Even saying too much out of nervousness can be misinterpreted. Talking quickly, over-explaining, adding extra details. All of it can create the appearance of uncertainty, even if you've done nothing wrong. And perception, in these moments, is powerful. So what's the takeaway? It's not about refusing everything. It's not about being uncooperative. It's about understanding the line between required compliance and optional conversation. Because in many cases, you are required to provide identification. You are required to follow lawful instructions. But you are not always required to answer questions like, where are you coming from? Where are you going? Why are you here? And this is where awareness becomes protection. Because when you understand your rights, you move differently. You respond differently. You stay calmer. And that changes the entire interaction. But here's one more thing most people never hear. You can still be respectful while setting boundaries. Officer, I respect what you're doing, but I prefer not to answer questions. That tone, that wording, it keeps things calm. It keeps things professional, and it protects you. And this is where everything comes together. Because the goal is not confrontation. The goal is control. Control over what you say. Control over how you respond. Control over how the situation unfolds. And most people don't realize they have that control until it's too late. So next time you see those lights in your mirror and that question comes, where are you coming from? Pause, breathe, and remember, you don't have to fill the silence, because sometimes the smartest thing you can say is less. If this opened your eyes even a little, make sure you subscribe, and more importantly, share this with someone who needs to know it before they're in that moment. Because knowing this after it happens is very different than knowing it before. Because in that moment, when the lights are flashing and your heart is racing, you don't get time to research your rights. You don't get time to rewind your words. You don't get a second chance to unsay something that may be misunderstood later. And that's the part that stays with people. Not the stop itself, but what they wish they had known before it happened. Because in many cases, nothing dramatic happens at all. You answer, the officer nods, you drive away. But every now and then, something small shifts. A question leads to another question. A detail doesn't line up perfectly. A tone feels off. And suddenly, a routine stop doesn't feel routine anymore. And this is where everything changes. Because once a situation escalates, it rarely goes backwards. It only moves forward. More questions, more scrutiny, more pressure. And what started as a simple moment on the side of the road becomes something you carry with you long after it's over. But here's what most people don't realize until it's too late. The turning point is often invisible. It's not a big mistake. It's not something obvious. It's a sentence, a casual answer, a few extra words that didn't need to be said. And this is why awareness matters more than anything else. Because when you understand what's happening beneath the surface, you stop reacting and you start choosing. Choosing your words, choosing your tone, choosing how much you give and how much you keep. And that changes everything. Because you're no longer just a driver in a stressful moment. You're someone who understands the situation, someone who stays calm under pressure, someone who doesn't get pulled into unnecessary conversations. And that kind of control is powerful. But here's the final thing you need to remember. This isn't about being clever. It's not about outsmarting anyone. It's about protecting yourself in a calm, lawful, respectful way. Because under U.S. law, in many situations, you have the right to remain silent. And exercising that right is not wrong. It's not suspicious by itself. It's not something to fear. It's something to understand. And when you understand it, you carry yourself differently. You respond differently. You move through these situations with clarity instead of confusion. And that clarity can make all the difference. So the next time that question comes, where are you coming from? You won't panic. You won't overthink. You won't feel pressured to explain everything. You'll pause. You'll stay calm. And you'll respond in a way that keeps you grounded, protected, and in control. Because sometimes, the difference between a smooth interaction and a complicated one is just a few words, or the decision not to say them at all. If this changed the way you see something as simple as a traffic stop, then you already know how important it is. Subscribe if you want more real, legally grounded insights like this, and share this with someone who would answer that question without thinking, because one day, that moment might matter more than they ever expected.